The worst thing she ever said about me was when she thought I couldn't hear. It was past midnight, and the apartment smelled like jasmine. Her perfume always lingered longer than she did. I had just returned from the kitchen with a glass of water when I heard her whispering on the phone. I paused, careful not to make a sound, staying hidden just behind the hallway corner. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. Or something darker. He's like a plant, she was saying, her voice low, conspiratorial. You water him, smile, and he sits there. No questions, no pushback. It's peaceful, but God, it's boring. There was a pause. Then laughter. Not hers, his. A man's voice. I didn't need to guess. Caleb. Her ex. The one she told me she was completely over, the one she never wanted to see again, the one I shouldn't be threatened by because I wasn't that type of man. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes, letting her words crawl into me like splinters under skin. He doesn't even know I've been meeting you, she went on. He's deaf. I could say anything, and he'd never catch on. The glass in my hand trembled. I gripped it tighter. She thought I couldn't hear her. And to be fair, she wasn't entirely wrong. The accident 2 years ago had stolen most of the hearing from my left side. I hadn't told her the full truth, that I could still hear faintly on the right, that I'd trained myself to read lips out of fear of fading into the background. But what she didn't know, what she never bothered to learn, was that silence made me sharper. Watching made me wiser. And I had just watched the woman I loved confess to betrayal, as if I were furniture. That was the moment something cold and clear crystallized inside me. Not rage. Not grief. Clarity. If she thought I was deaf, I'd let her keep thinking that. Because silence is a weapon. And I was done being her piece. They say when you lose one sense, the others sharpen. I don't know if that's true. But after the accident, what sharpened most wasn't my hearing. It was my silence. Before the crash, I used to talk too much. I filled every awkward moment with noise, jokes, compliments, small talk. I needed people to like me. I needed them to see me. That hunger didn't disappear after the collision, it just learned to hide behind smiles and quiet nods. I was 24 when the car flipped. 4 months in rehab. Damaged eardrums, partial nerve loss. The left side is worse than the right. I could still hear muffled sounds, red lips when I focused, but to most people, I was just the deaf guy. Especially to Alice. Ah, Alice. She was sunshine in a wine glass, elegant, intoxicating, just the right amount of bitter. A nurse back then, volunteering at the rehab center. She took an interest in me when most people looked away. Said she liked how I didn't interrupt her stories. I didn't have the heart to tell her I could hear some of them. Just enough to catch the rhythm, not enough to ruin the magic. She made me feel like I wasn't broken. She cooked for me, laughed at my dry humor, posted Instagram pictures of our weekend hikes with captions like, "My quiet hero." I let her paint that narrative. Let her fall in love with the version of me she needed. But somewhere along the way, love turned into performance. Her kindness felt performative. Scripted. Like she was starring in some savior complex fantasy. She'd narrate our love story to friends like a romance novel. He's been through so much, but I stay because I believe in healing. I used to think that was noble. Later, I realized it was just branding. Then came Caleb. He didn't show up right away. Alice rarely talked about him in the beginning, other than to mention he was an old boyfriend. Wild, unpredictable, toxic, she said once while folding laundry. But her eyes lingered when she said his name. Like she was flipping through old photographs in her mind. When he moved back to town, she said it was a coincidence. That he'd reached out for coffee. I pretended to believe her. I pretended I couldn't see her checking her phone more often. Pretended I didn't hear the change in her tone when she laughed. Pretended I couldn't hear, period. She thought I was deaf. Fully. Irreversibly. She'd stopped signing months ago. Spoke freely around me. Whispered secrets into her phone late at night, never realizing I'd learned to lip read in the mirror, for hours, while she slept. Then one night, she told him. Told Caleb that I was just a placeholder. That I couldn't give her what he could. That I was a soft heart in a broken body, and she needed fire. And me? I sat 10 feet away, watching her reflection in the microwave door, learning the truth word by word. Caleb was the kind of guy Alice used to say she'd outgrown. Tall, smug, with an ego that could smother a city. He had a startup once, ran it into the ground, then rebranded himself as a creative entrepreneur. His words, not mine. He wore leather jackets in July and quoted Bukowski unironically. The kind of man who believes his chaos is charming. To Alice, it was. Again. I remember the day she left. Left a note on the counter like it was a thank you card. Said I deserved someone whole. That word, whole, cut deeper than anything else. As if I was some broken object to be handed off or discarded. But the funny thing about silence? It gives you time. Time to process, to feel, to plan. While they rode off into the sunset, I rebuilt. Quietly. Steadily. Strategically. And eventually, I met Lena. She didn't walk into my life like a hurricane, she arrived like rain after a drought. Soft-spoken, deliberate, partially hearing-impaired herself. She never pitied me. Never used me as a prop. She listened. Really listened. We started small, gallery meetings, shared projects, conversations that didn't need to be loud. For the first time, I didn't have to perform. I could just be. That's when I realized. Love isn't about who notices you when you're silent. It's about who understands your silence, and doesn't try to fill it. And that's what made my revenge inevitable. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. People say silence is empty. But when I met Alice, it felt full, for the first time in years. It started at the art exhibit downtown. I was standing in front of a surrealist piece, something jagged and screaming in color, when I felt someone step beside me. I didn't look right away. I'd learned that eye contact, especially when people figured out I couldn't hear everything they said, led to pity. Or worse, that slow, exaggerated sympathy talk. Like I was 5. But she didn't speak right away. She just stood there beside me, eyes on the same piece. After a few moments, she leaned slightly toward me and said, with careful enunciation, "It looks like someone exploded from the inside out." I nodded. Then I took out my phone, typed "You see that too," and showed it to her. She grinned. I don't just see it. I feel it. That's how it began. We exchanged numbers. Our first conversation stretched across a cafe table with notepads, hand gestures, and text messages passed like notes between school kids. But it wasn't awkward, it was electric. She said my silence made her want to say more. That my presence quieted the noise in her head. I didn't tell her then, but her voice, soft, unhurried, was the first sound that didn't feel like static in a long time. In the beginning, she was gentle. She asked questions, listened without rushing. She said I made her feel seen. "You're the calm I didn't know I needed," she whispered once, her hand resting lightly on mine. I fell for her with terrifying ease. We moved in together after 7 months. Our apartment became a space of soft light, shared playlists I could feel in my bones, and late-night kitchen dances where she'd hum against my shoulder. I memorized her expressions. When she was happy, her nose crinkled just slightly. When she lied, her left eyebrow twitched. I didn't need perfect hearing to know her. I read her like poetry. She called me her rock. Her anchor. I believed her. But slowly, subtly, something began to change. It started when her influencer career began to rise. She landed a few sponsorships, began speaking at wellness panels. People adored her aesthetic, sunlight, herbal teas, soulful mornings, with me in the background, my face cropped, always smiling. "You don't mind, right?" she asked one day after uploading a video where I handed her coffee without a word. "They love how serene you are." I smiled. But a part of me curled inward. We stopped having conversations. Or maybe, she stopped waiting for my replies. She started answering for me when people asked questions. Joking that I was mysterious, a bit of a monk. When Caleb came back, the ex-boyfriend she swore was her chaotic past, she told me not to worry. "We're just catching up. He's harmless." But I saw the way she dressed up to see him. The way she started checking her phone at night, locking it when I entered the room. Her laugh changed too, sharper, brighter. A little too loud. Still, I stayed. I told myself people evolve. That love isn't always a tidal wave, sometimes it's a quiet stream. But the current had shifted, and I didn't want to admit I was already drowning. The night she called him from the living room, thinking I was asleep, was the night it all cracked open. She didn't whisper. She didn't care. "He's sweet, but he's deaf. He doesn't get it." My throat tightened, but I made no sound. She laughed, like it was freedom. "I stayed with him because I felt guilty. But you were always the real thing." And just like that, the woman who once kissed my forehead in silence turned my quiet into a joke. Into leverage. I didn't confront her. Not that night. Not even the next morning when she kissed my cheek and called me angel. I just nodded. I watched her leave. And that was when love died. Not with a fight. But with a whisper she didn't know I heard. I remember the moment the world shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No slammed doors, no screaming. Just the soft hum of the espresso machine in the kitchen, the scent of jasmine oil from the diffuser Alice always kept in the living room, and her voice, low, laughing, floating in from the next room. I sat in my usual spot by the hallway, pretending to sketch. The door was slightly ajar. She didn't know I was there. More importantly, she didn't think I could hear her. "I mean, it's not like I hate him," she said, her voice feather light, coated in that breathy tone she used when she wanted to sound sincere. "He's sweet. But, honestly, I stayed with him because it was easy. There was no pushback, no chaos. He can't even argue." There was silence, then a man's voice replied, deep and too familiar. "Caleb. You're saying you never loved him?" She laughed. Laughed. "It wasn't love. It was stable. I needed that after the fallout with you. But now that you're back." I stopped breathing. My pencil is still on the paper. "He thinks I'm some kind of angel for staying," she continued. "But sometimes I wonder if he even sees me. Like, the real me. Maybe he can't. Or maybe he just won't. Either way, he's not the one." Caleb said something about starting over. A fresh life. Together. Then she murmured something I couldn't quite catch, and they both laughed again. I wanted to scream. To walk in and confront her. But I didn't. I just sat there, frozen, a ghost in my own home. It wasn't the words alone that shattered me, it was the tone. That casual cruelty. That dismissal. Like I was a piece of furniture. Something silent. Something beneath her. I hadn't always been like this. The hearing loss wasn't congenital. It came after the accident, a left side impact, fractured skull, nerve damage. The doctors called it partial, but in social settings, partial might as well be total. People gave up repeating themselves. They stopped including me. Except Alice. Or so I thought. She had stayed. Cooked for me. I held my hand when I was too tired to stand. Whispered, "You're my peace," when we lay in bed. Now I realize those were just lines. Temporary kindness to mask long-term resentment. She thought I didn't know. That I couldn't hear. That my silence was compliance, not heartbreak. I waited until the door closed behind Caleb that night before I stood up. My legs trembled like I hadn't used them in years. I walked into the living room. Alice was on the couch, texting, probably him. When she looked up and saw me, she smiled. "Hey, babe." I just nodded. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust my voice not to crack. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling while she slept soundly, unaware that the man she thought was powerless had heard every damn word. The next morning, she made pancakes. Hummed while flipping them. Kissed my cheek like she hadn't torn something open inside me. "You're quiet today," she said. I just smiled. That afternoon, she left to visit her sister. I opened her laptop. The password was still the same, on 3L Alice. There were emails. Messages. Plans. She had booked a one-way flight. To Bali. With Caleb. I scrolled through their chat. "I'll leave him before the weekend. It'll be easy. He won't even fight it. He can't. You and me, like before. This time for real." I closed the laptop gently, like if I slammed it I'd be admitting something final. I felt numb. Not the kind of numb you get from shock, but the kind you get when you've been bleeding for a long time and only just realized you're dying. I stared at the framed picture on the bookshelf, me and Alice in Central Park, arms wrapped, leaves falling in gold and red behind us. Her smile, so wide, so staged. Mine, unaware. It has always been me giving more. She loved my silence. Not because it was sacred, but because it was convenient. She left that weekend, just like she said she would. No face-to-face. Just a note left on the counter like some poorly written breakup cliché. "You'll be okay. You're stronger than you think. I need to find myself. Caleb understands me in ways you never could." No apology. No regret. Just disappearance. I didn't cry. Instead, I cleaned. Every trace of her, gone. Her perfume bottles, her teacups, the framed quote by the door that said, "Love is louder than words." What a joke. I boxed it all, took it to the curb, and didn't look back. Then I sat in my studio. It was quiet, oppressively so. But this time, I didn't hate it. I picked up a blank canvas. Dipped my brush into red. Then black. And I painted. Not her. Not me. But a figure made of shadow and wire, choking on roses. Thorns in its throat. It was painful. But it was also true. I posted it to my art page with no caption. Within an hour, it went viral. Raw. Visceral. Whoever painted this has seen something dark. Yes. I had. And I wasn't done seeing. I wasn't done speaking. Not with words. But with something louder. With silence she couldn't ignore it. When she left, it wasn't just the sound of the door closing that haunted me. It was the silence that followed. That thick, suffocating silence that wrapped around me like a wet shroud. No apology. No goodbye. Just a note that said, "You deserve someone whole." As if I was broken. As if I hadn't already been putting the pieces of myself together long before she gave up pretending to care. I didn't cry that first day. Or the second. Grief has stages, they say, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But when the betrayal is this calculated, it skips the polite sequence and claws into your chest all at once. For days, I sat in the dark. I'd eat a slice of toast in the morning. Maybe. Mostly I just stared at the walls, wondering how I missed it. Her drifting eyes, her half-hearted smiles, the way she stopped holding my hand unless someone was watching. The warning signs were everywhere. But I'd convinced myself it was stress, pressure, routine. I made excuses for her coldness like it was a favor. But the truth? She pitied me. And eventually, she resented me for it. She wanted someone louder. Someone with flash and chaos. Someone who didn't remind her that real love sometimes whispers. So she went back to Caleb. I saw the photos before I was ready. They flooded my feed, her laughing on a rooftop bar. His arm around her waist like he'd never let her go. Her caption read, "Finally home." I stared at those words until the letters blurred. That was my home she meant. My art sat untouched for weeks. My hands felt useless. The apartment, once filled with shared routines and quiet affection, now echoed like an empty chapel. Every room carried a memory I didn't ask for. Her perfume still lingered on the pillows like it had unfinished business. One night, I caught my reflection in the window. Sunken eyes. Unshaven jaw. Hollow cheeks. I looked like a ghost that hadn't yet decided whether to haunt or leave. That night, something snapped, not in rage, but in realization. She thought I was deaf. She thought I didn't hear her betrayal. But I did. Every word. Every syllable. Every careless laugh. And maybe the part that hurt most wasn't what she said, it was that she never thought I deserved to hear the truth. She reduced me to an accessory. A placeholder. A soft, quiet body to lean on when the world was hard. And when it wasn't hard anymore, she peeled me off like an old sticker. But I wasn't broken. Not really. I was bruised. And bruises fade. That was the first time in weeks I picked up a pencil. I didn't know what I was drawing at first. My hand moved without asking for permission. But when I looked down at the paper, it was her, Alice, eyes closed, lips curled in a false smile, standing in a field of empty picture frames. Frame after frame. All of them shattered. I laughed. Not because it was funny. But because the pain finally had shape. And once it had shape, I could control it. That night, I didn't sleep. I drew until my fingers cramped, until the sun rose and the shadows retreated. By morning, I had a plan. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't beg. I'd make her see me, not as the man she left, but the man she could never replace. And she would never, ever forget what she lost. I didn't plan revenge to hurt her. Not at first. It started with silence. Not the kind she thought she gave me, but the kind I chose. After Alice left, after she packed up the last of her cruelty and walked away with Caleb's hand on her waist, I sat in the living room for hours. Then days. My world was a hollow hum. Even the things I once loved, my sketchbooks, my morning tea, my music, felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. But even grief eventually gets boring. And that's when I began to draw again. At first, it was just noise on paper, black smears, jagged shapes, rage with no logic. But the more I let it flow, the more form it took. Faces emerged. Scenes. Stories. And all of them led back to her. Alice. She thought she left a broken man behind. Someone small, invisible, voiceless. That's the thing about people like her, they confuse quiet for weakness. But I wasn't weak. I was just waiting. One evening, Lena came over. She'd been curating a local exhibit, Expressions of Survival, she called it. She saw a sketch I'd left lying on my desk. It was one of the early ones, an abstract piece, filled with jagged lines and faded words scrawled in the corner. She looked at it for a long time. Then she asked, softly, "Who hurt you?" I didn't answer. Not then. But that's when I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about public humiliation or scandal. It was about narrative. About truth. My truth. I wanted the world to see what happens when someone uses another's silence against them. I wanted them to see the cruelty that hides behind charm, the betrayal that grows in smiles. So I told Lena everything. Not the sanitized version. The full, bleeding truth. She listened, like no one ever had, and when I was done, she said, "Let's tell your story. Your way." Together, we designed an exhibit. Heard in silence. Each piece was a moment, moments Alice thought had vanished into my silence. The night she lied about her whereabouts. The morning she told Caleb I was a phase. The confession she thought I couldn't hear. That one, I had captured on camera. It wasn't intentional. First, but after months of suspicion, I had installed a small lip-reading security cam in the kitchen. The footage wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. Her mouth moved. Her words were clear. He was just something I settled for. That line became the title piece. A sketch of her mouth mid-sentence. Broken into fragments. I hesitated before agreeing to include it. I wasn't sure if it was too much. Too cruel. But then I remembered the look on her face when she thought I couldn't hear her. The glee. The relief. And I thought, no. This wasn't revenge. It was a record. It was a legacy. It was mine. Still, I knew what I was risking. She had a public image, sweet, nurturing, self-made. I would be labeled bitter. Maybe even obsessed. But I'd spent years swallowing my voice for the sake of others. Now it was time to speak. In ink. In charcoal. In silence. And if she happened to walk into the gallery one day and see her face shattered across canvas? Well. She'd know. I heard everything. And I didn't break. I built it. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I didn't want the cold. I wanted clarity. I wanted her to see. It started with silence, my greatest ally. After Alice left me for Caleb, I let the world believe what she wanted it to believe. That I was the helpless, fragile man too emotionally damaged to hold a woman like her. She took the narrative with her and ran wild. Meanwhile, I laid bricks in the dark, brick by brick, stroke by stroke, until I built something she could never tear down. The art came pouring out of me like a second heartbeat. First came The Echo Room, a series of faceless sketches, mouths open in laughter, but no sound. Then, Transparent Confessions, where I painted hollowed-out lovers, all spine and secrets. I told the story without ever saying a word. And it worked. Lena saw the pain before she saw the man. She never needed explanations. She looked at my pieces and said, "You don't have to be loud to be heard." And that's when I knew, she was the one. Not Alice. Not ever. Our wedding was elegant and intimate. White orchids. Minimalist decor. I designed the invitation myself, but Alice never got one. It didn't matter. She came anyway. I saw her before she saw me. She walked into the gallery-turned reception space like it still belonged to her. Wearing red. Always a flair for symbolism. I caught the flicker of hesitation in her eyes when she noticed the crowd, the attention, the way Lena's hand found mine effortlessly. She hesitated, but not for long. She approached slowly, her heels clicking against marble like nails into the past. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "Ethan, you can hear me, can't you?" I didn't respond. I only smiled. and turned back to my wife. That was day 1. Day 2 was the exhibit. Titled, Heard in Silence. Lena's idea. My story. Our execution. Each wall featured a pivotal piece, the kitchen lie, a charcoal sketch of 2 lovers whispering behind a man's back. Phase, a black canvas with a single red thread fraying at the edge. But the centerpiece was the projection. A visual of Alice, laughing softly on the couch, telling Caleb. He's sweet, but dead weight. You're the fire I've always wanted. He doesn't even know I'm leaving yet. The audio wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was captioned, lips synced, with soft piano underneath. No accusations. Just confession. Her confession. The moment she thought I couldn't hear, preserved forever. The gallery was packed. People stared at the projection in silence. Some teared up. A few gasped. One woman whispered, "That's emotional abuse." I stood in the corner, watching. Alice arrived an hour in. She didn't recognize her own voice at first. But the moment she saw the screen, she froze. Her lips parted in disbelief as the room's attention turned to her. Her eyes found mine, pleading, burning, begging for an explanation. There wasn't one. I walked away. The fallout was swift. Influencer deals. Gone. Brand partnerships. Dropped. Comments flooded her feed, questions, outrage, concern. But she didn't respond. Because there was no response. The world had finally heard the truth she thought she'd whispered into a void. She reached out, of course. An email. This isn't fair. You misrepresented me. I was venting. You took it out of context. There was no context that could save her. And I didn't need to reply. Because silence has always been my sharpest weapon. Instead, I posted one image, just one, on my art page. A new piece. A man sitting alone on a bench in a quiet field. No ears, no mouth, only eyes wide open. Captioned, "We don't need to speak to remember." The world moved on. She didn't. Months later, I saw her again. Grocery store. She looked thinner, paler, as if the truth had drained the color from her bones. She looked at me like she had something to say, something rehearsed. But I walked past her like she was a sketch I'd erased from a canvas. She was never my ending. Just the mistake that gave my life texture. The exhibit now tours in 3 countries. Students study it. Survivors write to me. And Lena? She sleeps beside me every night, fingers interlaced with mine like we're drawing each other in our sleep. Sometimes I still hear Alice's words in my head. He's sweet, but dead weight. But those words don't haunt me anymore. They remind me of how far I've come. How a man thought to be deaf heard every word, and used them to paint his freedom. I never heard from Alice again, not directly. Just the way you sometimes hear about someone through silence. Through friends who pause before saying her name. Through articles that briefly mention her fall from social grace, then pivot toward my work, as if her role in the story was merely a footnote. Funny how quickly people forget the girl who once said she stayed with me out of pity. Now I was the artist with a voice that transcended language, and she was, well, just a woman who gambled and lost. But this isn't about revenge anymore. Not really. After the exhibit closed, Lena and I flew to Nara, Japan. It was cherry blossom season. Quiet, slow mornings. Tea under the sakura trees. She would sign little things to me, beautiful, rest, finally. Words I never knew I needed until someone gave them gently, without expectation. I didn't bring my sketch pad. For the first time in years, I let my hands be still. I watched people, really watched them. Lovers taking photos, old men feeding deer, a child tracing shapes in the sand. No one spoke much. It reminded me that you don't need noise to be seen. You don't need words to matter. I did wonder, once, what Alice thought when she walked into that gallery. When she saw her own cruelty framed in brush strokes and flickering captions. Did she feel shame? Anger? Regret? Maybe. Maybe not. But I'll tell you this, I wasn't thinking about her when Lena kissed my palm and said, "You survived." I was thinking about how silence had never betrayed me. People did. But silence, that was my sanctuary. In the end, I didn't take revenge on Alice. I just gave her a mirror. And I walked away before she could smash it. There's power in being misunderstood. Power is being overlooked. I let her believe I was fragile, voiceless, disposable. She never knew that the moment she dismissed me, I started sketching my escape. Now, I live without the need to explain myself. Without needing anyone to validate my worth. I found someone who listens not out of guilt, but because she chooses to. Every day. And as for Alice, she lost the one thing she never knew she had, a man who loved her not because she was perfect, but because she was real. Before she performed. I hope she learns from it. I really do. But me? I've already moved on. There's nothing left to hear.